two examples of just what I consider typical IT kind of operations or development to highlight some of the things that are happening with the cloud. And I'm happy to go up and down depending on how people want. But it's really to highlight how we're working with customers to help them either deliver solutions or, just as important, really manage their hybrid cloud or traditional IT environments. A lot of this technology actually is similar from the standpoint of the automation side or the tools. What's changing very quickly is the technology underpinnings and some of the things people are trying to do. So first I'm just going to start with the idea is that we're giving people the ability to work in either these single delivery models or across them. We've already seen this slide, but it comes back to this again, because a lot of times what we hear from people is, depending on what stage they're in, help me use cloud. So what I want to do is just highlight how people, if they're starting with just traditional data center, we try to explain this to them. So the first thing I'd ask is what percentage of applications are typically automated in an enterprise? People have a number? I'll find out really quick. It's ridiculously low, unfortunately. Anybody? So what I mean is they have actually automated the ability to deliver either a new application or an update. And there's actually a lot of other requirements, I would say, to make it real, but just that. They've got the ability to hit a button, so it's not just death by 100 scripts. They've actually automated, from some compliance standpoint, the ability to deliver an app. What percentage of enterprises? Three? Any other number?
That's probably swayed for those that have large-scale apps that are massive.
Yeah. So the numbers vary. The highest number that I would accept is somewhere around about 10 or 12, and I think that's if you only look at large enterprises. I think if you include the broader, it's definitely single digits. The reason this is important is because, quite frankly, it's hard to take advantage of the cloud if you're not doing automated delivery of solutions. And the reason for that is because now we get into the sourcing strategy aspect. So if the idea of a cloud infrastructure is it's giving me flexibility to deliver a workload or to move a workload based on either cost changes, SLA requirements, data requirements, or quite frankly, I got mad at my vendor, or any of those, I don't really have an easy way to move it. So the first thing that we look at is you need to have an automation layer so that what you're able to do, just from a simple standpoint, is define a package. So that is, what is the actual resources that go with an app. Hopefully you can do that from essentially the bare metal all the way up to the client, because all those layers are different. And so you really should be able to define that package. Then you need to define the process. Who is allowed to move this? And how are they allowed to move it? And where are they allowed to move it? Those are all separate decision vectors. And again, if you're not automating it, think about all those steps and all those different decisions that if someone different does it this week or this month than they did before, and they didn't quite have the instructions all down right, how this is kind of fraught with error. And this is how things like websites go down. Or this is actually how Amazon recently had their last outage. I don't know if you guys are familiar. And they run their site just like we do on our public cloud, which is they have an A/B. And someone literally had one script wrong, and it knocked out their Western node for like several hours. And they did their mea culpa, as we would have. And this isn't to point fingers at them. It just was a very public outage. And anybody that's worked in IT, has had that happen, where someone simply fat-fingered a script or ran something out of order, or in their case, what happened was something had gotten updated and it just didn't sync quite right. So that's just sort of reality IT. So the point about this is you can still make mistakes, but it should be a much lower risk of making a mistake. So what we're doing here is, again, automating the way that we define a package, setting out the process to deliver it, having the ability to push it out with rollback and failure. So if you push it out and it doesn't work, you want to be able to refer back to the last model. Now, we haven't even done cloud yet. This is just actually regular IT, and doing it right is the way I would say it. Now, the opportunity once you've automated is, this is where we can take advantage of the cloud technologies. Now, what I want to do is I don't want to deploy the asset, the physical asset. I want to create a service that I can deploy that gives people the ability to access that application or workload. And so this is a real important distinction, and this is where cloud gets interesting, because this is where the ability for me to provide the right access level is another degree of flexibility. The ability for me to provide the right version of the service is another degree of flexibility. And the ability for me to put different SLAs or security on that type of service, the version of the service, is a degree of flexibility. So this all sounds great, but in some ways I just made life more complicated, because you've got to be able to track that, you've got to be able to maintain it, you've got to be able to update those. And again, this is why the automation is important. If you haven't automated the single service that you're providing and everybody gets to, that's a lot of work to keep it up to date. You probably aren't going to put out a second, third, fourth, fifth version of it as a service, or come up with ideas on how you create new monetization or business opportunities if you haven't started with the basics, which is you got to virtualize it, you got to automate it so that you can continue to update it. And what happens with this is then you just keep taking it to the next level. So instead of an infrastructure service, so it could have been something that's just data as a service. How do I give someone access to that? Or I've created a basic image that all my developers can go and get for their Linux distro to set up a laptop. Or I've automated the ability for someone to deploy all the applications for a new employee. These are all just real simple examples. As I move up, I get to more interesting things. So I get to platform as a service capabilities, where we start talking about deploying whole development environments or a whole QA and test capability, where instead of having someone go in and say have to request time to do their testing, which is pretty typical in a development shop, for certain priorities, they might be able to request a dynamic deployment, which means what we do is, you know what, I don't want to wait for testing queue at 2 in the morning. I need this tested now because we need to make an update to the website for some reason. So what I could do is automatically roll up, which means set up a whole testing environment on the fly in the cloud, run the test, get all the results, email to the developer, and then tear that thing down instead of having to just sit there and spin and cost the company money. And then, of course, the SaaS applications or essentially information apps, which we consider their own kind of flavor of needs because of both the compute side and the analytics side. So that's what we mean when we talk about cloud enabling a data center. You have to virtualize, automate, and then you also have to have the tools and processes in place to manage that. Let's stop here. Questions, comments, discussion? How many people have kind of talked about this before? This is an area that comes up a lot with people. I hope a lot, because to me, this is one of the golden opportunities for IT to make improvements. And it's not really cloud per se, but cloud forces you to automate and to use these type of processes. A few shaking heads. Okay. Take your photos. We're going to move along. So now what I want to do is I'm going to flip to the developer side. And what I was focusing on was more the IT operations component of this. The reality is the tools and the technology are very similar. It's just that essentially the person is different, which is you've got a developer. And in many organizations, the way that development and ops has been done for a while, or I guess I should say historically, it's the great waterfall approach, which is people build apps, and then they get queued up at operations waiting to actually get tested and deployed. And then people point at each other saying, whose fault is it that the new version of the app's not up? What we're trying to do with these new technologies is, again, because of the automation, do more as the app is getting delivered so that when it hits IT operations, there's really no need for them to do a whole other QA process. It can really just flow through more naturally. Or in some cases, it doesn't even need to go through IT ops. The development team can actually just push things out directly into production. And there are people that do that. I always think it's good to have at least some kind of check, but they do that. So let's talk about kind of how this works in a couple different ways. First, the self-service side on the data center. So how many people have this discussion as far as self-service delivery of either apps or IT infrastructure? And what are the questions that come up? Just typically, as far as what people are trying to do. How? Just how, okay?
But it's not just how from the context of how do I do it technologically, but rather what other changes do I need to make, right? What process changes need to evolve, what governance models need to change. Because like in your last slide, going back to, yeah, there you go.
Oh, this one?
The developer piece to IT ops.
Right.
So theoretically, there should be nothing wrong with the developer being able to push something into production. So what's the heartburn that we have around it? And it comes back to the way we've been doing it really isn't conducive to supporting that. But if we had good processes and good models, governance models around it, there'd be no reason why a developer couldn't automatically push something out to production.
Yep. Yeah, I see it, small companies, that's a more natural thing that can happen because you've got, well, everybody knows everybody. There's two parts of this. One, it's the skill sets, and then everybody knows everybody. And I think in the bigger companies, we're seeing one approach to that is people are getting new ways to assemble teams. And I think this is an interesting approach because you either have, again, what I'll call the multi-skilled person who can do it all, or you put together a team, a hybrid team that includes the right people from development, QA, and operations, and you let them be able to be the magic button pushers, I guess, or that's the way they get into agile delivery. But I hear that a lot too. Other questions, comments? Okay, let's talk a little bit about this broker concept. So this is the way we see most IT shops, in essence, trying to evolve forward if they're already doing automation. Or if they're not doing automation, this is the way that we explain to them is maybe an easier way to get value faster. And the reason I say that is because if we go back, a few years, automation, well, actually it doesn't matter a few years. Automation sounds like big, expensive, low value type of project. And the reason for that is because a lot of times it just seems cheaper to throw a bunch of bodies at it with a bunch of scripts and they'll just work it through. Because of cloud changing some of the dynamics, and again, I think this is important where we get to, we're not just talking about cost, we're talking a lot more about cost and revenue streams. People get way more excited about, ooh, this automation can help me, instead of rolling out a new version of the service in a week or 30 days or 60 days, do it in hours. Now I'm excited because as a business, we can say, if I can deliver a new version of the application or a new service 30 days faster, 60 days faster, that equals revenue for the company. So again, I think that's where this change in dynamics is driving people to do more of a self-service model and delivery. And we see this a lot with people. So I'm not going to go into all the product details, but it's in here. So we have a product that we deliver both as a software solution, as part of our HP public cloud and then part of the integrated solution with cloud system. It's geared towards this whole self-service model. So the whole idea is really simple. It combines the automation technology with the governance capabilities, and then the important part is that self-service access, both for either the development IT ops side, but also the end user. And so what that means is we can give you the ability, whether you want to install a software solution driving non-HP infrastructure, do this on HP hardware, or from our public cloud, that ability to do the self-service automation and deploy on physical, virtual, or cloud environments. And I think that's, again, an important part. If you're thinking about just one delivery model, that's great, but you really do need a model in place where your teams can deliver into essentially a catalog of services. You can version those, which means you've got a governance model now, and then you can give the right audience the right access to the right service, and then automate that deployment. And so again, that's what we end up seeing is you have the ability to be a broker. And this is where IT, we see, can now get back and be, in essence, a partner with the business. Because when we have the ability to go out with a credit card or a small purchase order in some ways and acquire applications or really IT services. Like I could go out, say I'm a business owner, I have my own little micro development team. I can go out and get them, any compute service, storage service, IT tools. I can go acquire all my own business applications. What we're seeing companies want to do is have a strategy. Yeah, we'll let them pick, but we need ability to source it and then offer it as a way to deploy it and manage it. So that's, again, the way that we see IT starting to work with cloud, SaaS applications, and other infrastructure services. This is duplicative. I'm just going to skip over it. The other aspect of this that I mentioned before is we need to be able to define both what a service does and then the capabilities so that they can be self-describing. And this is important both from the standpoint of how I manage them and version them. If we have development teams working on the services, it's also really important for then how we offer them out in a catalog to different users. And what we have with this is two aspects again. It's the infrastructure side. Where can this service be deployed? What are the SLAs it is able to provide? And then also, what does it do? And so those are two different aspects of how we both bring in services and then add governance on top of them. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that not actually, that's a drag and drop, right?
Yeah, there's both an API and then they've got the fancy drag and drop.
Is it actually, I can change it's not only a map, I can change bandwidth in there in the icons and do configuration straight on the map?
Yeah, so the way that it works, and this greatly simplifies it, I think. So based on the attributes, so when you bring in a service, the service is going to have different attributes, and if you define it as something someone can change, then they would be able to do that. If you don't, then it would just be set. So that's where we can get into, at the infrastructure layer, both requirements, in other words, what's the deployment requirement? Does it have different things that you can change as far as what the attribute setting would be? And then the same thing at the application layer. And this is usually where you would have the end user. So the end user view. This would be really what I would consider the admin view. So that means someone's already put the service in, and now we're letting you configure it to actually push it out to, say, your department. So maybe what this could be, let me see if I can tell what it is. Hey, look. Oh, so this is a Red Hat server. Okay, yeah, so this was a really good example. You might have set this up so that there's different footprints for it. So I've got a dev test, or it could be a small dev test, large dev test, production small, medium, large. And then what you would let is someone come in here, say in business unit 42, you let them set it up for what they're going to allow their developers to use, because this would have a cost connected to it that you might have to pay based on what they're deploying. So that's what this would be, is really the admin view where you're configuring it. And then there would be another view, which would be, in this case, a developer coming into the catalog to pick what they need for, say, a new development project they need to do.
Is that interface taking maybe, I don't know, a server with certain tools and have the server working in like seconds, right?
Yeah,
after
seconds
it's mounted,
or minutes,
of course,
depending on what you're deploying and where you're deploying it. And to me, this is the part that is interesting. It's not the, I got to go order a server and someone's got to set it up. It's the, hey, we need to get that development project started, and you just go in and it's up and running. This is the public cloud experience, but inside your corporation. And you could be deploying this either on a public cloud, or it could be your local private cloud. And in fact, it could be traditional hardware too if you really wanted to, but that would be added, obviously, a person step in the way for that. Okay. And there's a lot of, this I wanted to put in here, not so much for what the product does. I think this is a good, hey, there's a lot of stuff for you to think about when you get into what has to happen. And to me, I usually talk about these things in if you're not automating because you think I can just throw more people at this, these are a lot of things you should think about as far as what are all the places for error, or what are the opportunities that you might be missing. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, again, it's the IT being held like a profit center, like a P&L. They need to understand where are we supporting what businesses, what's the different costs, what's the cost to deliver a service, an update, and it's not okay to just run that on a spreadsheet. So a lot of this automation, while we focus on the, oh, I delivered the bits, there's also a lot of business impacts that come along with that. Whether it's the SLA and how do I let people pick the SLAs or the capabilities and then automate the deployment, or also the business side. And we're working with a lot of different vendors. The two that I would actually probably bring up the most, there's a lot that we're doing. We've talked about OpenStack, so obviously we're working with people like Red Hat and Rackspace and IBM and everybody else that's in OpenStack. Another part of this that's important is the application definition model. So there's a lot more maturity, I guess, on the infrastructure side, because there's one of two things that's happened over the years. We've got a lot of history on automation, so we just built integration to everything. So that's one way to go about it. But the other thing is on the application side, we really do need more industry standards on application, really metadata. So there's a standard called Tosca that we're pretty involved in. SAP is one of the really active application providers. And we've talked a lot about some of the things that we're working with them on. What we expect to see happen is, on the automation side, more and more people, besides having a proprietary application definition, they're going to also kick out a Tosca model. And the benefit for that is that it gives, again, the company ability to have choice and tools, and it makes it a little easier, we would say, to deliver automation around the management applications. Because anybody here, I don't know how many people have been involved with like an SAP update or any large application update. There's a lot that goes into that. Okay, so I'll pause. I'm going to segue more into the developer-centric aspect. Any questions on data center or anything people are doing with data center automation and management they'd like me to answer? Oh.
I think it's not an answer. It's maybe a concern or thinking about more information.
We are talking about cloud. We are talking right now that I think that how many years we are talking about cloud as a cloud computing, something like that, 4 years ago. There is any study that can help us or tell us about the percentage of investment that a company can save using this kind of solutions? Because there is, when you go to the street, there are companies that maybe have concern about to jump to the cloud and security. There is a lot of reason that maybe sometimes those companies said either the governments are taking the step to jump to cloud, but there is any study that can help us to understand a little more what is the percentage that a company or an industry is saving?
Yeah, and so I haven't seen a general purpose study yet. I've seen a lot of different data from mostly vendors or from some of the analyst firms that specialize in market data analysis. And again, what I've seen so far, and I think that's just the reality where we're at, it tends to be more on the cost reduction side. And I don't think that is the right, you can't just extrapolate it from that type of view, because that tends to be very workload specific. So they take some workload, define what the compute storage is, whatnot, and they say, hey, if you move to XYZ cloud, you can save 82%. Well, that's great if I happen to have an application that looks exactly like that, but that's not usually how it works. So I haven't seen anything like that. And to me, where we're at the moment is I don't think anybody's going to have that data. I think what people are realizing is that there's a combination of hard and soft costs, because there's people and process savings or costs, depending on the amount of effort and culture change to adopt cloud. And then this is, I think, why people are looking at the business benefit part. Because if I can look at it more of, this is the advantage I get in terms of time or new business opportunity, it's more about that than it is just the cost savings. I think in the next 4 or 5 years, you're going to see studies that look like that. It's the same way, you know, in 99, 2000, we would talk about, why do I have an internet website and what's the value? You know, what's the value of e-commerce? How much e-commerce is moving online? It was either 100% is moving online or it was stupid. You know, there was no middle. And I think that's where we're at here. In 5 more years, we'll have a better feel for things. I don't know, anybody else have something different or seen some really great study and data? I haven't seen that yet. I think we had another question.
Capacity planning with the cloud maps, or is something that the customer have to do?
Yes, that's a good question. So there's two different things that we have around the services side. So one is cloud maps. So is everybody familiar with the cloud maps? Yes, no, maybe? Okay, so cloud maps are two things. One is actual solutions that we predefine and pre-validate. And so it's for everything from like a Linux server deployment to SharePoint deployment or Microsoft Exchange deployment, SAP CRM. I don't remember how many there are right now, but there's a whole bunch. And the idea there is it 200? And I actually work with the team on this, so I'm familiar with it. What we're doing is providing a couple things, a blueprint, so this is how you go deploy it, and then the actual cloud map, which is really all the content, so that if you're using both our tools or the different platforms that we test, it's the actual content you use to deliver the solution. And so a lot of times instead of days or weeks, you can use our automated solution and you can have it deployed and you can start working with it in an hour in some cases for the simple ones. And then our services group has an application transformation offering that's part of their cloud strategy, and that's where they work with companies to one, baseline, so evaluate where they're at and help them build their application strategy for how they move to the cloud or automate. Like many people already have assets in the cloud. How do we help you move it forward? And so usually that's where what we would do is we would do something really specific for their need. But the cloud maps do provide you some part of that on a very specific solution. Yeah, go ahead. We're going to give Chris some exercise.
Look up my lunch, that's good.
So there is also some capacity planning tools in Matrix, and you can use that to look at your capacity, forecast your capacity growth. You can also use it to assess, how your capacity would change by adding additional components, upgrading your servers, adding new servers, that type of thing. So there is capacity planning and management tools built into the cloud system matrix.
Okay, so we keep asking questions. I'm going to segue to the next use case.
I have one question to add to your question earlier, the cost and what are people seeing as the investment. And you were saying you hadn't really seen too much studies coming out, but...
Well, not the way he worded it, no. But yeah, go ahead.
What I've started to see, though, it's actually starting to be the cost of my agility. How quickly can I move? As opposed to the money that I'm saving, it's how quickly can I move my business into doing something different. And I think that's more the kind of the business context now. I think it's moving on to just the cost savings.
To my favorite topic, which is application development and development tools, because I've been working on different versions of this stuff for my whole career. And I actually love what's happening with the cloud and what it's forcing with some of the tools. And the reason for that is because for many years, I would just say, if you went and talked to a developer, they like writing code, they like creating solutions, and they all hate the tools that they have. For various reasons. And so I think that we've seen a couple different waves of actual innovation in the market. One has been more around process, which is really what I think of Agile. Agile is more about development process and how do I make it more people-oriented, which is a great idea. And now what we're seeing with continuous development or continuous integration, depending on which term you prefer, which are both kind of part of this bigger DevOps discussion, is how do I also get tools that respect that type of difference in delivery approach and quite frankly better enable it. Because a lot of this is again about how do we streamline the ability to define, build, and deliver applications, because that's kind of why IT and developers exist. So where we see people struggle is, one, how do I build things right the first time? And right has a lot of implications. It's not just best coding practice, it's how do I make it secure? How do I make it scale? How do I help people build it so it can be deployed in the development or in the production environment without having to rewrite everything? So there's a whole set of capabilities that come in there. The other parts here are really more about process and people, quite frankly. So how do I break down kind of these artificial barriers that have been built over the years between dev and ops? So I'm going to use a product that we have called CDA to kind of highlight what we're doing here, but I wasn't going to focus tons on the actual product. I want to talk more about what the issues are. So this is aimed more at an IT shop in a company. If I were at a startup or if I'm one person, these things kind of just all get done. And I can talk about that. So today, these are kind of artificial, well, they're not artificial. Traditional IT, ITIL, all that good stuff, these are all specific processes and different gates that happen. And so typically, each one of these steps has their own tools with their own capabilities, and that's why these walls exist. So what we try to do is put in place the ability to support this with one tooling capability or a set of APIs that can be used across multiple tools. So when you look at this, the way that, let me just build it out, it's probably easier. As I go from building my application, what happens is I slowly get farther and farther. What I mean by that is my first build, I build it, and I'm getting my application done. It's not quite done. I keep doing some work. On build 5, finally it's done. It goes out to QA. They reject it. It comes back. I do some more work. I send it out. And eventually what happens is I get staged. Some other people work on it. And it passes all these tests, and it goes to production. And again, we've gone across many different tools, lots of different people, and it's kind of silly because what we could really do is automate this, and this is what our fancy marketing people is, they build this for me. We can automate it so that what happens is I build it once, and then it gets deployed correctly to these different target environments. So the way that works and how this comes back to Converged Cloud is, this gets back to what we were talking about, is you need to model the infrastructure, and you need to be able to model the app. Historically, this has been done 2 different ways. One, it's all one thing. And so this is if you look at like an enterprise application, there's not really a difference between infrastructure and app in a traditional ERP system, for example. And there actually isn't in a lot of the SaaS applications that have been built. They're just all kind of one big thing. So what we provide is the ability, you can define the environment, whether that's traditional infrastructure or a cloud. So the way that an application works on your private cloud is going to be very different from your public cloud. So you need to be able to model that. That gets to what we were talking about, what are the attributes and capabilities when we were deploying that Red Hat server before. And then what you also need to be able to do is let them define their application so that it can self-describe what its needs are. And what we're then able to do is, it's the same use case we described before for operations. We're automating the deployment of that application at deployment time. And so when the developer builds their application, and it could be Pet Store, for example, first they run it locally, and everything's great. And today, they're going to deploy it out to the Amazon cloud. Well, what they're able to do is just say, hey, deploy it to Amazon. And what we're able to do is package it up and simply deploy it with all the right attributes, the right capability, the right SLAs. And without a tool that does that, what you would end up with is something that's called a tool chain, where what I'm doing is putting together all the right tools. So I might use Puppet, I might use Chef, I might use some GitHub in there, and I might use Eclipse as my IDE, just one example. And so what I've done is put together a whole bunch of different scripts and then a tool that I can kind of manage those all together. And I'm sure I'm in my terminal window about 18 times to make that happen. And so the whole point is to provide a single deployment capability with lifecycle support across that development environment. Oh, this doesn't need to be in here. Oh, I guess that's it. Okay, so I'll just talk through the scenario. What I was going to do is highlight like some of my own experience. So on the side, I still play around and build some web apps and stuff for my brother who has his own company. And this is just to highlight how much has changed with what you can do on the cost side of cloud. And I think it's really important to just kind of keep in mind. because sometimes you need enterprise tools, but a lot of times there's some very good solutions out there. And this is why what we're doing with continuous integration is really important. People want to be able to plug together the tools they want into a tool chain. And so that's what we're really trying to do. When you look at HP's continuous delivery, it's really the ultimate tool chain assembly tool. It does the automation. It provides just enough process so you can use it standalone, but we're really presuming you're using automation solutions from us or someone else. So if you look at the example that I'm doing on my own or other people, I've kind of put together my own tool chain. So I've got an IDE. I'm using, in this case, Rico for a development environment, both a development test and a production. And then I'm actually the automation, and then I use a GitHub account to have a repository so that what I can do is develop locally, test locally, and then push out to the production environment. And I can have both a test environment on the internet so you can see it live and see how it all works, and then the actual production environment. And that all costs $7 a month to run, because everything on my laptop's free. The only thing that costs money, because in the last couple of years they needed to make some money to keep it running, and it's ridiculously great value, is the Git repository service. What I just described 10 years ago would have cost probably thousands of dollars, because I would have had to have all this actual real solution and technology. And that's what we're seeing people do, is there's cases where I absolutely have to have the enterprise technology, but I'm going to pick and play and piece it together. And so the approach that we try to take with the continuous integration solution is purposely that we assume people are assembling their own tool chain. So we provide all the capabilities, but like the question earlier, did we see people using Puppet or Chef or any of these other things? Absolutely. And what we see is in different companies, that tool chain is going to be different from developer to developer or from department to department. And so when you think about this from a cloud standpoint, this is part of that cultural issue. And it's no different than 10 years ago, every developer wanted their own IDE. So you couldn't easily, I guess, tell everybody, hey, you must use Eclipse or you must use whatever you wanted. Because what they would do is they'd have it on their machine and then they'd run what they wanted to, and they just would hide it so you couldn't see it. So I think this is a big part of the cultural aspect of you can only get people to use these tools if you continue to make them open and you let them mix and match what they like to use. Because developers just want to write code, and they'll find a way not to use something if you impose it on them if it doesn't do the job. So let me pause there. Questions about the development side, and again, it's the same automation technology, but we're bundling it differently, and quite frankly, the tool is very different in an aspect of what we're providing people and providing the ability to plug and play other capabilities into it. Everybody's ready for coffee? Again, go ahead.
So the session before about networking, it's all about taking complex things, being able to plug in applications. Everything you've just said now is automating everything. It's almost like plug and play.
If we can.
If we can. Well, you're saying that we can. So my question is more theoretical about everything you're saying, everything we've been saying makes it much easier, drives out cost, takes something that is very complicated, and you simplify it. So why is it, as a personal opinion, why do you think enterprises are moving as slowly as opposed to going faster into the cloud?
I think my answer to that is that some enterprises are moving slowly, but others are moving very quickly. And I think this is, it's come up a few times. You cannot underestimate the cultural issues that cloud brings up. In fact, to me, it's, in many cases, a bigger issue than the technology. It could either be a risk-adverse issue, or it's just not invented here, not the way we worked, or it's do we have the right skill sets, or a mix of those. So I think with a lot of this, that's a big part. And then the second part comes back to, and this is why, every week almost, at least a couple times, I have a talk with a customer about why aren't they automating more or at all, Mm-hmm. And I think you still also have this, it's cheaper to just throw people at it. And that's why I think that even though tomorrow it's not going to be 100% of people automate, would argue is we see more data about what's really working from a business side. People that take a people and process approach and apply automation intelligently are going to be the ones that are most successful with a cloud approach. But it's, yeah, I don't think people are just necessarily moving slowly. I think there's lots of people moving incredibly quickly. And I talk to some of those. I just would like to talk to more of them.
I guess as a comment, I mean, my thing is, I see that a lot of enterprises, and I'm not talking about large enterprises, people that I deal with are small size, you know, mom and pops, you know, that step a little bit over bigger, that they see that the upfront cost on automating is what's going to bury them.
Right.
So, you know, they're going, God, you know, I'm going to have to spend so much money on developers' time, you know, all this other stuff that goes into automating this process, while I grab Peter, Paul, and John here, and they'll do the process, and I'm just kind of, you know, paying them a little bit of money every single day. They don't see the long-term revenue that they're losing or not gaining by automating upfront. I guess it's to put the nail, you know, on this is upfront money versus long-term money. And when you tell them upfront money, X amount of thousands of dollars, they go, you know what, I'd just rather do it another way, or the way that I've always been doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I also think this is some of what's driven people to use public cloud, because in some, depending on what they're doing, the automation's kind of just built in. And so they didn't have to go through some of the upfront work or whatnot. They just said, hey, let's start with a new project. And then they do that right. And I think that's one of the reasons that the popularity of some of the public cloud tools and then also tool chains has been happening. Do you have a question?
Yes, I always been curious about, from your perspective, since you are walking the dungeons and there on automation, what is better for application development company? Should I go as infrastructure as a service or platform as a service?
Well, I don't think there's a single answer to that. I think it's going to come back to what types of applications you're building, or do you have processes in place already. I also think PaaS is completely overblown. I mean, just from a personal standpoint, I think the most important thing that, if I had to pick, one, because I think it's easier to do, is the infrastructure as a service part. Assuming you've got some type of development processes in place already. If you don't, then I would actually argue taking the leap with PaaS in a really well-targeted project is a good idea. But yeah, it depends on what you mean by PaaS. I mean, if you mean like a full-blown development environment where I can build, which one?
Of course, it's infrastructure as a service. If I'm going to go with root access.
Oh, okay.
But there are certain applications out there, I'm not going to name them, but that you can get pay as you go with the platform that are more cheaper than working infrastructure.
Well, so for example, I'll give you a real concrete example. I'm a huge fan of Heroku. If you happen to be developing applications where you can use Heroku effectively, I would use that in combination with certain infrastructure services. See, I can't just give a generic answer on PaaS because they're all so different. But if what you're trying to do is deliver very targeted applications, and there's a PaaS that has the right technology capabilities, it's open, and I can plug in external services really easy, I'm a big fan. The other place is if you're a Microsoft shop, Azure is great. I mean, if you're dedicated to .NET and everything that Microsoft does, Azure is great. If you've got multiple technologies, you've got the same problem there that you would, in traditional IT. So I think I would probably say it's easy to say, hey, you should be using infrastructure as a service, because I think everybody that is a certain size enterprise is going to have a hybrid IT strategy where cloud is some component. PaaS, I think it's a different discussion. I think some people are going to be able to take advantage of it. Other people, if you don't have the right culture tools, or you're not using the right technology, there might not be the right solution for you right now. So,
legacy app versus
new app. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So legacy app versus new app. If it's a brand new app, then PaaS might be real attractive. If you've got, a million lines of existing code, then infrastructure as a service might be another, easier path. So I think that's also another way of looking at it. Because many PaaS platforms impose a paradigm.
Do you have PaaS with Azure?
Excuse me?
Do you have HP has PaaS services that I can implement SQL?
And Azure, right?
Yeah, so I guess, would you be able to expose our services into Azure? Yes. Where you'd have to be really careful, and I don't know how much you know about Azure, but Azure has, it's a SQLite implementation. It's not pure SQL. So if you wanted to, you really have to pick a flavor. In fact, this happened to me several years ago when we didn't use the data service on Azure because we didn't want to have that happen. So I think that, yeah, you could take our services and use them in an application, you deploy it on Azure, but then it's really hard to mix. So you're either going to use the native SQL database service on Azure, or you're going to use some external one, or you're just going to roll your own. And that comes up, I think, every single customer on Azure. You just have to pick, and some people care, or some don't.
Some companies are going to let you play with the data sources. Some of them are not.
Yes.
Some of them are going to give you just fact tables and lookups to,
but our database as a service is just pure SQL, so you could run it anywhere, and that's the way we offer it. Any other questions? And what's next? Do we have Nigel, or we go to break?
Well, so here's the deal: we've got hot cookies in the oven, but they're not going to be ready for 10 minutes. So I'm all for taking a break now. We've almost got 1.5 more sessions left, but we are going to do the server, and we're going to do cloud system next. We'll run it for an hour. Take a 15-minute break now. Have hot cookies. Do Nigel infrastructure, cloud system, and industry standard servers, and we're going to feed in some more converged infrastructure. We're trying to finish early because we've got this tour. Zarelli keeps reminding me we have to get out of here by 4 o'clock-ish, so we can do a tour around the governor's mansion. So we've got a few things to fit in this afternoon. Let's go for a break now. Do a, 7th inning stretch. I think that's what they say. Yep. Come back refreshed. Hot cookies when you come back, and then we'll pick up again.